Hello, and thanks for joining us on the Week in Review. I'm Amanda Vinicky. It all comes down to Tuesday, and it is not an exaggeration to say that the stakes are high as former President Donald Trump makes a third run for the White House.
Kamala, you're fired. Get out, get out.
Sometimes using more violent rhetoric against Harris allies.
Let's put her with a rifle standing there with 9 barrels shooting at her, okay? Let's see how she feels about it. You know, when the guns are trained on her face.
Vice President Kamala Harris makes her case in Washington, D.C., where Trump supporters gathered in 2020 before storming the Capitol.
America, for too long, we have been consumed with too much division, chaos, and mutual distrust. And it can be easy then to forget a simple truth. It doesn't have to be this way.
This as election officials prepare to defend the integrity of this year's election. Meanwhile, Chicago's mayor says he'll close a budget gap with the property tax hike.
And I understand that today I'm asking families to lean in yet again and do a little bit more in order to make sure that their neighbors are not laid off and to make sure that we don't have to cut vital city services.
Breaking a campaign pledge.
We're going to make sure that we provide up to $1 billion of new investments over the first term that I serve. And we're going to do it without raising property taxes.
And after only a week on the job, Mayor Johnson forces out his CPS school board president over controversial social media posts. Our Week in Review panel is Justin Lawrence from Crain's Chicago Business, Lynn Sweet, the Washington bureau chief for the Chicago Sun-Times, Gregory Pratt of the Chicago Tribune, and Michael Liptrot of Block Club Chicago. Now let's get right to it. I want to spend a moment talking about the consequences of this election, because it seems like every time you hear a race is the most consequential of a lifetime, this matters, every vote counts. But Lynn, is this unique?
This is unique because you have a candidate, Donald Trump, who is by any measure not qualified to run for office because, let me take it off, we only have, a short time here. He is an election denier. He makes serial false claims. He materially threatens the life of someone. That's just his latest one. And he has scattered thoughts about what he will do actually governing if he gets a second term. But by most standards that do not apply here, which is why this is the most important and most consequential, including the election charges against him and all the other federal criminal charges against him, make this a consequential election if he does get re-election, and polls show he has a very decent chance of doing that on Tuesday.
Does anybody want to take umbrage with how Lynn has characterized this? And I will add that, by the way, not just charges against him, he is a convicted felon at this point.
Yeah. Well, when it comes to the city of Chicago, Trump presidency would potentially be pretty catastrophic in terms of them pulling money from the city, in terms of them doing the mass deportations that President Trump talks about, which he has said is going to be bloody and is going to be taking out tens of thousands of people from the city of Chicago by force. So, the stakes are certainly high.
Certainly high. And Michael, as journalists, we strive to be fair, to be objective. Is that something that is a challenge, or can you sort of assess how, you of course cover local politics, but as we all read the national media as well, just the ability to cover this race?
It's something, Amanda, when you think about objectivity and the idea of objectivity versus in practice, and these past couple elections being unique in the media as a whole being challenged, fake news entering the cultural zeitgeist, and as a journalist doing your job while America has a growing sentiment that what you do lacks integrity and what you do is not the truth. And that's something where this election is going to be a test of that, of journalists to truly be objective in reporting the results, reporting the facts, and also the elephant in the room, which is election denialism, that regardless of what happens on Tuesday to Donald Trump and his supporters, he is going to win. And even if he loses, it's going to take a lot to prove that he has lost. And I do not think that Trump will concede anytime next week. I don't see him acknowledging a loss as with the 2020 election. So it's going to be really on journalists to stick with what is fact to demonstrate whatever result comes from Tuesday's election.
Well, and right now we have polls that show this is going to be a very tight race, particularly in the battleground states. It appears as if they are neck and neck. Lynn?
It does. I forgot to add, by the way, in my first run at this is racism and sexism in my list of reasons why this makes this a stunningly different election and consequential than anyone. Polls are close. The whole election, as our viewers probably know by now, depends on these 7 swing states. So it's just down to the wire, and there's no, I would not predict anything based on any polls right now.
Well, let's go back to, because we did hear some comments that I think still are fairly stunning to hear from the campaign trail. And this is when Trump last night talked about shooting Liz Cheney, the former senator and, of course, daughter of a former Republican vice president, in the face. His campaign saying that he meant to say that she's a warmonger, Justin, that referencing to what it is like for troops on the battlefield and that she needs to be aware of that. Is this statement going to change at all the race? Because it seems like other folks are saying, we're not buying that.
I don't know that it would change the race at this point, right? Because we know who Donald Trump is. He's been doing this for 8 years now, right? So I don't know that those comments, as kind of heinous as they are, will change people's opinions, because I think they're pretty set in their ways. But I do think we've become jaded a little bit as a country, as journalists, to kind of talking about how kind of insidious these kind of comments are and where we are as a country. Obviously, Donald Trump has been shot at during this election. There was another attempted assassination. I think we need to be really clear that kind of flirting with this kind of violence against your opponents is really dangerous.
So one of the things that has come up in this election that is important is this new phrase called sane washing, and journalists do and are, again, what sane washing is normalizing the horrible things that Trump says and glossing over them, in accusing someone and saying that he wants to shoot someone, talking about someone's physical anatomy, mocking all the racist, sexist stuff you've heard.
So you're saying that the solution is to not sane wash, but to give it attention? Or
yes, of course. And here is my point. Throughout this election, though it's been a struggle, journalists are trying to do it. And what seems an unfair double standard here is that the bar, in terms of how public absorbs this for Trump, does seem lower. If you look at his rally at Madison Square Garden, the people that preceded him, and things he says that are not true, false claims that he makes constantly, and that is what is happening because it comes at you like a fire hose, which means when Harris or Biden says something, it gets magnified, such as the comment when Biden used the word garbage. All of a sudden, here it is, you set it up. Well, the Trump people said he didn't really mean to say he was going to shoot her in the face if he could, or have someone do it. Okay, they're asking for just explanation. They do not have that same consideration for someone else. This is tough. Goes back to the whole kind of ethos of Trumpism. His supporters say, oh, don't take what he says literally because they know what he means. But that's only for what he says. Greg, that is not true for anyone else.
Is there any danger in continually amplifying some of these more outrageous and, in cases, insidious remarks? Is that how Trump was given this platform in the first place that really saw him rise?
I think there's some fair criticism of that. I think it's when you do it without context, when you don't share some of the comments. I don't think you can not cover a major presidential candidate because he says something offensive. I do think that you do have to cover it seriously, and sometimes you see like, and I actually think the New York Times and the Washington Post have done a great coverage, but every once in a while you'll see stories that say something like, you know, President Trump was weaving when he said he shot someone or he would shoot someone or whatever. And you're like, just write it straight. You know, don't be cute. Just write it straight. Write about what it is he said. You know, when he says this is the last election, you're never going to have to vote again, which he said a few weeks ago, just run it straight and let people know about it. I remember, I think some of the papers were too slow to write about that and what the significance of that is. I thought it was remarkable when he recently was talking about throwing poll workers in prison, which he made a comment about that, and it kind of got glossed over. And so I think that when you cover it as like, you know, he's a constant showman saying all sorts of crazy stuff, and by the way, he said here's this crazy thing about imprisoning poll watchers, and here's this crazy thing about Arnold Palmer's genitalia, and you shouldn't put them on the same level. I mean, you do cover both, but you have to write about the serious stuff seriously, and I think sometimes we miss the mark.
Let's take an opportunity to hear from each of the candidates, including Harris during the speech referenced earlier that she gave on the ellipse of Washington with the backdrop of the White House, and then also a closing argument from former President Trump.
This is someone who is increasingly unstable, obsessed with revenge, consumed with grievance, and is out for unchecked power.
It's very simple. You can't lead America if you don't love Americans. That's true. You can't be president if you hate the American people, which I believe they do.
Michael, is that a comment you think that is going to resonate as both campaigns are trying to reach out to these small group of undecided voters that the president right now, former President Trump, is saying called them garbage?
It's good you bring that up, Amanda. And for what it's worth, trying to apply logic to the politics that Trump has been instituting these past elections, it's really just mind-boggling when you think about it. And there's going to be probably classes taught at universities about this type of tactics when it comes to politics. Between calling someone at a Trump event, calling Puerto Rico an island of garbage, to the most recent comment that you just played, it's all just shock value and trying to build on that shock value. And as Greg said, the need for context with this. In the same way that at a Trump rally, he recently referenced his little secret when it comes to the outcome of the election, which some people are viewing as an intent by him to tie the Electoral College potentially for the House to decide.
Right, because he was talking about that with the House Speaker, Mike Johnson.
Right.
And that's why that had so much potential import. And
still
why
does.
People paid attention.
The Speaker has not denied
So what we're talking about is if the Electoral College is tied, it does get thrown to Congress. And then, oh boy.
And Congress is tight too, Lynn. We focus a lot on the presidential race, but we don't know who is going to have control of the United States Senate or the United States House.
Right. The House needs, the Democrats need 4 seats they need to hold what they have and pick up 4 seats to take control of the House, which seems doable, especially since they have the seats in New York and California, the seats in New York that were seen as won by Republicans by mistake in 2022. So in the House, they have a decent chance, much tougher challenge to hold on to the Senate, now controlled by the Democrats.
And before we move on, I also want to circle back to the comments that we heard from Vice President Harris, in which she really talked about the danger in calling Trump a tyrant. Is this a salient closing argument for her, Greg, or is this something that sort of is a distraction by focusing on Trump instead of her own plans?
You know, I think that in political campaigns you have to persuade, right? You have to add. The old saying is about addition versus subtraction. I think that the people who think Trump is a dictator and waiting or whatever it is they think in that regard, they're against Trump. I think that, you know, Harris should probably talk more about issues facing the public that are not democratic, that are not high-minded and somewhat abstract, somewhat not, you know. So that said, she's done plenty of both, but sometimes I do think that, you know, the Democrats talk about that too much. And, you know, there are people who have, they're just people with real problems and real issues that go
Concerned
beyond.
about feeding their children,
Yeah.
paying the mortgage or the rent, what have you.
I think being an intellectual in politics is a losing recipe, and we'll see.
So speaking of paying the rent and the mortgage, Justin, we're going to go over to you because Mayor Brandon Johnson this week proposing a more than $17 billion budget that includes a property tax hike despite what he said on the campaign trail. So why is he flip-flopping on this pledge?
Well, because he pledged also that he would bring in $800 million, $1 billion in new revenue. He would tax financial transactions. He would bring in a head tax for each employee in a corporation, and he's failed to do that. Most of that is because it requires state action, and the state has made it clear that they're not interested in taking those votes. And so he was left with very little options, and he took what's the easiest path in the city of Chicago is to raise property taxes.
Easiest path for revenue, perhaps not politically, though.
Yes, it is difficult politically, but it's the one lever that brings in significant revenue that the city has always turned to. And the mayor promised that he would break that cycle, and he's found out in a year and a half that he was unable to do so.
Michael, now, does he risk losing any public support for reversing this pledge? I hear him talk a lot about promises that he made and why he was elected, and things like investing in schools and in disinvested neighborhoods. Does he risk losing and alienating the public by going this route?
He definitely does, and it's something where between the dissent within the city council for this new budget, to have Byron Centro Lopez voice his disagreements with the budget. That
Key
means,
ally.
Right, that's a big ally, and just the Progressive Caucus as a whole when it comes to this budget. And thinking about with progressive politics, that the idea of moving forward on these social issues, these key issues, you need a stable base and a stable foundation of a budget that is functioning. So when you think about the schools, when you think about treatment, not trauma, youth homelessness issues, all of these are going to get put on the back burner until there is a functional budget that can at least serve the baseline purpose when it comes to the city. And to essentially use taxpayer money between property taxes and then TIF funds to solve this issue to the voting public, this is going to be them bailing Johnson out when it comes to this, and thinking about what this means for future budgets and realistically another Johnson term if he chooses to run again, with this campaign promise rolling back and now the taxpayers and the voters going to fund the new budget.
Presuming it passes, what are the chances of that, Greg?
Well, he's got a very serious problem. You know, when you allude to Byron Sigcho Lopez and some of his progressive, some of the left wing, some of the socialist caucus who are really Johnson's ride or dies, if they don't vote for it, I don't understand why a Matt Martin or a Maria Hadden or some of the more moderate progressives would vote for it. You know, if you can't get your strongest supporters, other people who are in tougher areas are going to get killed. You know, so I think he's got a real challenge on his hands because he needs to get that under control.
So what's the alternative?
Well, he says the alternative was layoffs, right? And he's not going to take that option.
Why is that? So why is he so
Because,
averse? Is it politics or?
I think it's a little both. Like he says, cutting workers cuts city services. But I think the political reality here is, or the city council reality is, he doesn't have the juice to pass a budget in city council if the unions are opposed to it.
Please go on.
Well, just the unions have made very clear, you know, he is a union, came from the Chicago Teachers Union, but they've made very clear to him that, you know, we are friends, but we are not that friendly right now during budget season, and if you come for our workers, we're going to fight you.
Now, am I right? It's a simple majority?
Simple majority.
Okay, so here's the only number that counts. Ready? 26.
Truth.
And for him to go into this budget season and not to have that locked up and to know the chaos he is unleashing right now only makes it more certain that he will not have any good solution, won't get the property tax.
Any chance that's part of the whole plan?
Kind of like bait it out there and take
Sure.
it back.
Right.
I don't think so. I think he just was left without other options. There will be
despite going into this
calls to take
budget
it.
season knowing that
Yes.
there was going to be this deficit and saying no to an inflation-tied property tax increase last year.
Yes, and remember, he also pushed back the budget season by a few
Right.
weeks, so he even had a few more weeks to come up with another solution. But realistically, there was a $982 million gap, and even if he had kind of deeply cut the city's workforce, you only get so much savings in layoffs.
We have a few minutes left, and of course we have to talk about this ongoing drama at Chicago Public Schools because Johnson's newly appointed president of the CPS board, that's the Reverend Mitchell A. Kenneth Johnson, has resigned after just days on the job after some controversial posts surfaced. This includes that he called Jewish colleagues appear, quote, drunk with Israeli power, and he said we'll live to see their payment, and some also tweets described as misogynistic, like the, quote, sad fact that when a woman earns money, she does not feel the need to support her man and her family. Was this, Michael, inevitable that the new CPS president was so soon going to be the former CPS president, board president, that is?
I wouldn't say inevitable, but it definitely highlights an oversight when it comes to the vetting process for new appointees, and just the realities of when you have a board that resigns on a Friday and then the mayor is ready to appoint new board members on a Monday, that it's rushed. And the proper checks and balances when it comes to vetting these new members wasn't there. And just as if any of us were to apply for a journalism job, they would do the simple fact of looking at our social media and probably scrolling back a bit. And when I saw that there were social media posts, and then when I saw that some of these posts were from this year, I was thinking, who looked into this candidate? And did no one do the simple fact of scrolling back on someone's Facebook page?
Justin, you spoke with the mayor about this.
Yes, he was before our editorial board today. He kind of acknowledged what was glaringly obvious, right? That he called it a gap in the vetting process. He did make the distinction that he was not aware of these posts before, because that was an open question. You know, you either didn't vet him and didn't know about him, or you did and you knew about these comments and still made the appointment. So
and initially he sort of deferred from being clear about that.
He was being unclear, and it left people not knowing. So, you know, he kind of did a mea culpa, said there was a gap. I think part of it was this rush timeline to get new board members. And I think this board passed the most important part of the vetting process is he needs 7 people to do his bidding there. He needs 7 people who are willing to fire CPS CEO Pedro Martinez and do whatever sort of budget math is there to solve the CPS budget.
Well, you know, one of the things that's remarkable to me is, and I think there's perhaps some media criticism here of, you know, he has these controversial posts. He also was a disbarred attorney in Ohio, and we don't seem to, that didn't seem to get as much attention. And has the standards of public service fallen so far that we don't bat an eye at somebody has those kinds of issues and at least make them answer for why is that your choice? You know, there are 3 million people that live in the city of Chicago, most of them who haven't been disbarred. I was just really, this had a lot of problems, and it's really a remarkable process that led them here.
And we have about 30 seconds left, but Justin, back to you. What, if anything, does this mean for CPS? The board did meet this morning, but didn't really cover the board president's resignation, nor did they talk about Pedro Martinez.
They didn't go into that. And the mayor is still being cagey about whether or not he asked Pedro Martinez to resign. He has. But, you know, I asked him, look, with all of this turmoil at the board, and we didn't talk about it, on Tuesday we're going to elect half the hybrid school board.
Yes, we will.
Shouldn't we wait until January to solve these issues? And he said, no, you know, I have that power right now, we're going to do it.
And I have the power right now to say we are out of time. So our thanks to Justin Lawrence, Lynn Sweet, Gregory Patt, and Michael Liptrot. We are back to wrap things up right after this.
Tonight's presentation of Chicago Tonight, Week in Review, is made possible in part by Ann and Rich Carr, BNSF Railway, Francine and Dr. Anthony Brown, and the Mollenhauer Progressive Philanthropic Fund in honor of Ida Mollenhauer, supporting quality journalism. Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by the Alexandra and John Nichols family. The Polk Brothers Foundation. Additional support is provided by
And that is our show for this Friday night, the last, of course, before the election, coming just days away. If you want to finalize your ballot, check out our online voter guide that has a ton of information about where to vote. You can see if you're registered, and then while you're there, you can also read up on the candidates who are vying for your vote for state's attorney, for Congress, and yes, the school board, plus all those many judicial seats. You can find it at WTTW.com/voter guide. Now for the Week in Review, I'm Amanda Vinicky. Thanks for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and have a good night. Happy post-Halloween. So Justin brought up, yes, we're having a school board election for the first time.
And it's another test of whether or not Brandon Johnson's Chicago Teachers Union sponsors get the ticket passed that they're backing, because if they don't, that's another sign of political turmoil ahead for the mayor.
Do you think that voters really are that aware of who is connected with who?
Well, of the election, generally no, so the answer is still no, but it's really remarkable how little knowledge, and there's still people that don't know we're having a school board election, which is crazy.
There's so much money being put behind these candidates, millions of dollars.
$5 million, I believe, or so at this point.
Well, it's millions, and it's outside special interests and inside.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm that is proud to recognize its 20 attorneys, recognized in the 2025 edition of the Best Lawyers in America.